Back to the Future, Doc Brown and Clara's story. This is what I think that life might have been like for Clara and Doc Brown once they had gotten together in the 19th century. Hope you enjoy the book. Dr. Emmett Brown had escaped with the girl, the woman that he had met, when he had traveled back to the year 1885. The date was September 7th, 1885, and they had witnessed the crash of locomotive 101 as it crashed into the Shashi's ravine. It had been a spectacular crash, and the Doc and Clara had rushed to the side of the ravine to make sure that the DeLorean had not crashed, but had made it back to the year 1985. They both breathed a sigh of relief when they saw that the car had not crashed. The Doc had to think fast, for the people of the valley were going to want some answers. They destroyed a train and stole it as it came down the tracks. They had forced people off into the tracks and left them on the side of the tracks, standing there. The people heard the crash of the train and ran as fast as they could and to see what had happened. Clara and the Doc thought a minute, and as they watched the people running down the track, they hid the hoverboard. The Doc started yelling, "Clinton!" He ran toward the people who were coming down the track and told them, "Clinton, he saved you all." He knew there was something wrong with the train. He tried to stop it, but it exploded in flames and kept going faster. He saved Clara and my life today by pushing us away from the engine and trying to stop it on its own. He not only saved all of our lives, but he saved our lives too. The engineer came over and looked into the ravine. It was obvious that no one would have survived the crash. He declared Clint Eastwood a hero. Everyone then cheered and headed back to town. That morning, the men of town went to the crash site and tried as they could. No trace of Clint's body was found. There were parts of the train that were so damaged that you could barely tell what was and what was not there. They were afraid that Clint was lost forever. Everyone in the small town of Hill Valley was in mourning. This man Clint had come into their life, saved them from the evil Bedford Mad Dog Tannen, and had been charged with robbing a stagecoach along with his friends. Finally, the people of the town were safe. 2 weeks later, they were at a town meeting led by the mayor and Doc Brown, where it was voted that the ravine where the train had crashed would be named after the hero Clint Eastwood. It was voted that once the bridge was built, they would place a placard for all to see for the next few hundred years in his name. In the meantime, Doc had been working on looking at some of the mechanisms of the hoverboard. There were some things that made the hoverboard fly that would help him build another time machine. He had the time machine that he had arrived in the year 1885 that he could use for parts, and he thought that he might be able to make another time machine. Yes, he was going to work on that. Clara was the woman of his dreams. His best friend Marty had told him that love was at first sight. The moment that he saved her from the horse and buggy that had almost landed in Shashi's ravine, he and Marty had made the horrifying discovery that Clara Clayton was supposed to have gone over the ravine that day and die. They had changed history by keeping her in the year 1885. She was supposed to have died when she was coming to Hill Valley and was not due to be born until 1920, some 35 years in the future. Doc worried about what he was doing into the future and dedicated himself to doing nothing but good things for the town. The trial of Buford Tandon and his gang was quick, and Buford was sentenced to state prison for the next 10 years, along with the rest of the men in his group. Hill Valley was a safe place to be, and a good place to raise children now. Seamus McFly and his wife, Maggie, had become good friends with the Doc and Clara. They owned a small farm on the edge of town, and the Doc were telling them about what was going on for the next few days. Courting in the year 1885 was different from courting in the year 1985. It was considered improper for the two lovers, he and Clara, to spend time together alone in their home. She was a school teacher, and the town looked upon her much more critically than they would other women, so they spent their time together at church, and Emmett found himself spending many hours waiting with Clara at the schoolhouse. Each time they were together, he felt himself falling more and more in love. The holidays were now coming, and Thanksgiving was just 2 weeks away. Emmett had been raised in the 20th century and was not sure about what the holiday and celebration was in the 19th century, but he listened to the people, and Clara helped him. They were both invited out to the McFly farm, and the Doc was treated to a wonderful Thanksgiving feast. It was the first celebration at the McFly farm as well. They did have a turkey with potatoes, turnips, peas, and bread. For dessert, they all celebrated with a piece of apple pie. The food was delicious and the atmosphere cheery and happy. The Doc thought he found pieces of heaven and did not want to ever lose the woman he had loved, Clara Clayton. The days were now starting to get chilly, nights cold, and Emmett was used to central heat, and turning to a non-efficient wood stove for the year 1885 to get a little heat from the stove provided. The Doc was glad that he felt that he had moved to the northern part of the country. The snow would not be there as quickly, and he'd be able to take much better care of himself and his animals. The Doc had ordered a ring out of a magazine for Clara and had held it in his pocket for 2 weeks. He was going to ask her to marry her on Christmas Day. He thought it was a good day and wanted the day to be special for both of them. Every day he worked and then went to the schoolhouse to meet her. She lived in a small house near the school and had gotten into the habit of walking her home on a daily basis. Everyone in town knew that they were in love, and the Doc would tip his hat to people as he walked around. Whenever the Doc had a spare moment, he worked on a time mechanism. Between the hoverboard and some luck, the machine was starting to come along. It was going to take him months, maybe even years, to finish it. But he was determined to travel through time once more. He decided to purchase the old train and make it a time machine. With the flying circuits from the hoverboard, he had been able to figure out how to make it fly. He could fly the darn thing, but it was not going to be able to go through time as of yet. He had learned so many things from the time travel before, but was it going to be enough? He knew that if Marty had done things he had asked him to do when he was in 1985, but perhaps nothing else, he would leave some kind of message for Marty in the future. No, that would not work. He needed to do the thing himself. Clara was a brilliant lady, and a lady she was. She was kind, smart, loved children, and the two of them were happy no matter where they went, and were always laughing together. The Doc could not wait to marry her and go ahead with their lives. Clara was at home, thinking about the man she loved. He was a strange man who had come to her from the future. He came from the year 1985, but did not talk about it much. She knew that he was afraid that they would do something about the space-time continuum, and that it was scary to him. She knew that things about the future, sometimes she was tempted to ask him something. His answer she was learned through this natural course of time. Sometimes that made her mad. She just wanted to know certain things, not everything. She loved him with all her heart, and she wondered how they handled love in the 1980s. She was sure that it was still courting with love. It must be very different. And this was the end of the old century. She loved her feel. She loved his smell. She loved the strange things that he did. She knew that he was working very hard and making another time machine, and hoped that it would be successful. She wanted to travel through time with him. It sounded like a lot of fun, and they could learn things about history that no one else would know. The Christmas season was upon them, and people decorated their home with candles. It was very dangerous, but although the electric light had now been invented by Edison, it was still not in use in many parts of the country. It was especially not used here in Hill Valley, and the doc wanted to convince the town that it was time to give these new electric lights the chance. There was a town meeting in January, and the doc was going to bring it up. The two inventions would greatly help him with his work in making the time machine, so he and Claire spent much of their time at the schoolhouse where it was nice and warm. When the days got very cold, some of the townspeople would actually come into town and sleep at the schoolhouse. It was a very safe place to be. As the doc and Clara sat on one of the benches and looked through the telescope that she loved so much, they held each other's hands. Emmett had never even kissed her. Clara thought that the men in the 1980s, was that how he was? He was so nice and such a gentleman. She was not sure what to do. She loved him and wanted to have his children, but he had not asked her for his hand in marriage. It was not her place to make the first move. She was starting to get desperate. She put her hand on his shoulders as he looked through the telescope, and he responded by putting his arm around his shoulders. He bent her close and looked right into her eyes and smiled at her, but then he went back to gazing at the stars. That year, the winter came early, and many times the children of the village could not make it into school. Christmas was still coming, and it was just 1 week away. She had been trying to help her students to make her parents a present. The snow was deep, and some of the students got stuck at the school one of the nights. They were safe and warm in the schoolhouse, and she and Emmett made sure that they would feel good and warm. The parents had been told that if the weather got too bad, she would keep them in town for their safety, because she worried about the parents, and she wanted the parents not to worry about the children. That evening, the two of them worked together, and she brought the children to her home. She had a warm hearth, thanks to the Emmett, and it was there that they could have a bed to lie on. The benches had not been comfortable. Then Christmas came, and the caroling, and the celebration of the church. Clara and Emmett went once more to the McFly farm and spent Christmas with them. William was growing up fast and was now walking and starting to talk. Emmett thought of his friend Marty and how this little boy was his great-grandfather. Seamus and Maggie were the great-great-grandparents, and reminded Emmett of Marty somewhat. That evening, he brought Clara home and asked her if he could come in. She could not believe that he wanted to come in. He had never asked her without someone with him, but she did let him in at the time. He looked nervous and asked her to take a seat at the table. As she sat down, he got down on his knees and asked, "Would you follow me through time as my wife?" She couldn't believe it. He had asked her. She replied yes, and with that, for the first time, Emmett reached over and gave her a kiss. It was not a passionate kiss, but it was a kind one, and she would expect to get it from him. He left for a few minutes later, and the people in town would not talk and went back home. The following day was fun and great for Clara and the doc. They told all their friends about their engagement, and all the town celebrated with them. The wedding was to take place on Valentine's Day, February 14th, and neither one of them could wait. Emmett was from the 20th century, and he had forgotten that in his previous time, women were not allowed to work once they had been married. They would have to find a place to live. Clara would not have her home, and the stables was not the type of place that she would want to make a home for herself. The one thing that Emmett had was plenty of money. He had bought all kinds of money with him as he traveled through time. He and Clara started to look around the valley for a home. There was a home where Widow Lawrence had once lived. She was now in her 70s and gone to live with her son and wife. They looked at the home, and they both were pleased with it. The new home had 2 bedrooms and a loft, had a large barn, and the train tracks were right through the land that the property had. They would make it easier for Emmett to make his time machine. The house is on the outskirts of town, but not too far, and he could make it in less than 10 minutes on horseback. The house came furnished, and it was set up. They would have a place to live.